Right now, a ship leaving Shanghai takes about 30 days to reach Rotterdam in Europe. It travels through the South China Sea, across the Indian Ocean, through the Suez Canal, and into the Mediterranean. That route has been the backbone of global trade for over 150 years. But there is a second route. It's called the Northern Sea Route. It runs 3,500 nautical miles along the Siberian coastline through the Arctic Ocean, and it can shave about 10 to 14 days off that same journey, depending on season and conditions. Soviet ships used part of it decades ago, but it was never really commercially viable. Now it's becoming exactly that. The investment in traffic numbers have been climbing steadily for over a decade. See, Russia effectively acts as a gatekeeper. China is the biggest growing user, and the strategic implications are only now beginning to register for the rest of the world. To understand why this matters, I need you to look at the world from a different angle for a second. Look at this. Most maps show the world laid flat, of course. Asia on one side, Europe on the other, with the Suez Canal as the obvious bridge between them. That's the map every port, every supply chain, and every navy has been organized around for generations. But if you look at the Earth from directly above the North Pole, the picture changes. Europe and Asia are much closer, with the Arctic sitting right between them. The route from Shanghai to Rotterdam through the Arctic measures 12,800 kilometers. Through Suez, it's 21,000 kilometers. For a cargo ship that burns tens of thousands of dollars in fuel every single day, that geographical gap matters enormously, even if the full economic saving depends on conditions, insurance, and what class of ship you're running. And I don't like being the bearer of bad news, but the Arctic has been warming 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. Ice that used to be permanent is now melting every summer, and the window where the Northern Sea Route is passable keeps getting wider every year. If you look at the numbers, traffic along the route has increased insanely over the past decade. In 2010, 4 ships completed the full route. If I compare that to 2021, that number grew by a lot, even though most trips are still regional or tied to Russian energy exports. Okay, let's be honest, the number of ships making the complete international journey is still relatively small, but it is growing every year. Russia has spent decades preparing for this shift, building nuclear-powered icebreakers, Arctic ports, and military infrastructure along a coastline that the rest of the world has been ignoring. See, it's geography that actually explains the opportunity here, but economics explains why companies are actually testing it. A large container ship will burn about $50,000 to $80,000 worth of fuel every day. So literally shaving off 10 to 14 days from a single trip can literally save over $500,000 just in fuel. And of course, that's before you factor in crew costs, port fees, financing on the vessel itself. On a route a company runs dozens of times a year, those savings add up to a number that changes the entire business case. But fuel is only part of it. In modern supply chains, time is inventory. A cargo ship sitting at sea for an extra 2 weeks is 2 weeks of goods that retailers can't sell, manufacturers can't assemble, and warehouses have to finance in advance. Just think about it for a second. Faster transit means faster inventory turnover, which means companies can hold less stock, reduce their expenses, and respond more quickly to demand. Take industries that are running lean, like electronics, automotive, fast fashion. That speed advantage is actually worth serious money. Then we get to the congestion problem. The Suez Canal is a single-lane choke point. Remember when that container ship ran aground in March 2021 and blocked the canal for 6 days? That held up an estimated nearly $10 billion worth of trade every single day. Insurance markets, freight brokers, and logistics directors spent years after that event asking the same question. What's the backup plan if Suez goes down again? The way I see it is this: the Red Sea sharpened that question further. Since late 2023, Houthi attacks on commercial shipping forced dozens of major carriers to reroute around the entire southern tip of Africa, adding 2 to 3 weeks and millions in extra costs to every trip. Shipping containers that had never seriously considered the Arctic began running the numbers. I have to point out, though, why the Northern Sea Route hasn't already taken over global shipping. Well, it's because the obstacles are huge. Insurance costs for Arctic voyages are a lot higher than conventional routes. There's not enough search and rescue infrastructure along the Siberian, and there are very few ports that are able to handle large container ships. And obviously the weather along the route is unpredictable, even in the summer, and ships actually need to be specially built or reinforced for ice conditions. So you can think of the Northern Sea Route more of an up-and-coming strategic corridor rather than a replacement for Suez. So my question here, I guess, isn't whether this will replace traditional routes. The question is how large a share of global trade it will eventually capture, and who controls that share. Take a look at this map. Most of the Northern Sea Route passes through Russian territorial waters and exclusive economic zones. That gives Russia huge leverage over who it uses and on what terms. Ships traveling the route typically need Russian permission. They pay Russian fees and often even travel with Russian icebreaker escorts. So Russia acts as the gatekeeper of potentially the shortest sea corridor between Asia and Europe. The funny part is that Russia's claims over parts of the route are legally questionable. The US and several maritime law experts argue some sections should be treated as international straits under international law, but in practical terms, Russia has the icebreakers, the infrastructure, the geographic position to enforce its rules regardless of how that legal debate resolves. Russia currently operates over 40 icebreakers, including nuclear-powered vessels capable of breaking through nearly 3 meters of solid ice. The US has 2 working icebreakers. We thought that Western sanctions were meant to weaken Russia, but they actually pushed Russia to accelerate Arctic investment and find new customers that are willing to use that route. China exports more goods than any other country on Earth, and almost all of it moves by sea. Around 80% of that trade currently passes through the Strait of Malacca. That's a narrow channel between Malaysia and Indonesia. Now, Chinese strategists have long worried that the US could disrupt key shipping checkpoints like Malacca during a conflict, and that could cut off Chinese trade without a direct military confrontation, kind of like what Iran has done with the Strait of Hormuz. So Beijing has been looking for alternatives for years. The Northern Sea Route runs through waters where the US Navy has almost no presence. China has invested billions into Russian Arctic energy projects, started building its own icebreakers, and even named the corridor the Polar Silk Road as part of its Belt and Road initiative. 2 countries, both facing sustained Western economic pressure, are jointly developing a trade route that operates largely outside the systems that pressure depends on. I lived in Singapore for a couple years, and its economy was built entirely on its geography. The country is at the entrance to the Strait of Malacca, and that location basically helped turn the small island with 0 natural resources into one of the wealthiest countries on Earth, with one of the busiest ports in the world. An insane shift of Asia-Europe trade toward the Arctic would, over the long term, reduce how much of global shipping passes through Malacca. Fewer ships through that strait means reduced demand for Singapore ports, reduced refueling services, and even logistics networks. Now, remember, this is not an immediate threat. Arctic route capacity is still a fraction of what Suez can handle, and Singapore's role extends well beyond the Europe-Asia transit. But as a long-term strategic concern, it's one that Singapore's planners are watching carefully. By the way, India faces a similar question. Its position in the Indian Ocean gives it influence over the trade routes connecting the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia. But a steady and growing Arctic corridor could shift the weight of global trade flows northward and reduce over time how central the Indian Ocean is to that story. The Suez Canal opened in 1869. It reshaped global trade over the following decades. After that, ports on the old route around Africa declined. The economies built around them had to adjust. The map changed and the money eventually followed. The Northern Sea Route is a different kind of shift. Slower, more contested, and still constrained by enormous practical challenges. The countries investing in this corridor are making a long-term bet on where global trade flows will move over the next 50 years. I'm a strong believer that the countries that haven't started thinking about it could find themselves adjusting to a world that reorganized around them. I want to know what you think below, so let me know. I read all the comments, and make sure you subscribe to this channel to help support me grow, and I'll see you in the next one.